We'd like to welcome you to our A-Level History introduction to the OCR course that we actually follow. So I'm Elizabeth McCulloch and this is my colleague Kitty Wilson. Now we follow a course that spans about 800 years worth of world, British and French history, the idea being to give people a real spread of history. And we hope that there'll be something for everybody here. So a bit of political, a bit of military, a bit of social, a bit of economic, and hopefully something that's going to appeal to everybody.
So we kick off our studies in College 1 with a topic on Britain from 1930 all the way through to 1997. So we do a source-based inquiry into Winston Churchill, so his views into problems at home, such as the abdication crisis, problems abroad, so his views on the policy of appeasement, and then his key relationships during the war with both people at home and abroad. So his strategies during the war in the Mediterranean, his bombing campaigns, and indeed his relationship with people like Roosevelt and Stalin. We then take things a little bit closer to home by looking at how the policies of different prime ministers from 1951 onwards impacted people at home. So we'll be looking at, for example, key relationships with the trade unions, so problems that Callaghan faced, Wilson faced with that, and then of course more broad social problems, so recovery from the war, economic problems, problems with immigration and the tensions that causes within Britain, and of course the scandals that prime ministers face, such as the Profumo affair as well. There's also a little bit of foreign policy in there, if that's your bag. So we'll be looking at the Korean War, Suez, the Falklands War, and the Gulf War as well, all before examining the great Margaret Thatcher, her policies, her successes, as well as her failures. You'll need to come with an open mind. And indeed, we'll then also be looking at how her leadership sowed the seeds for Labour's victory in 1997.
In contrast to our modern British history course, we'll then be stepping back, we will be stepping back in College 1 at the same time to look at some medieval world history in the form of Genghis Khan and the explosion from the steppes. So we'll be looking at the rise of the infamous Genghis Khan. How was he able to create one of the most successful, one of the largest empires in history? And what impact did that actually have, particularly looking at the impact that has on Persia, on Russia and China. And actually we're looking at really kind of creating the foundations of what we think of as being China today. Now, alongside that, we also look at what life was like inside the Mongol Empire itself. So, I mean, this really was sort of a man's world in terms of being in charge, but actually surprisingly shaped by women for a very male world. So we look at the role that women had, as well as looking at the lives of figures that just leap out from history. Kublai Khan, Tamerlane, there's a whole selection of really lively, fascinating characters. Before we then look at how relations between East and West developed. So we look at the experiences of the exotic travels of people like Marco Polo, as well as looking at the development of the Silk Route and the impact that had, not least looking at the role it plays in the distinctly deadly spread of Black Death that devastates Europe.
And then in College 2, Elizabeth and I both teach you two halves of the same course that's all examined under one paper, which is looking at France from 1610 to 1715. This is a crucial time in European and world history. It's looking at the rules of Louis XIII and then the famous Louis XIV of Versailles fame. So on my half of that course, we'll be looking at social history over that 100 years. So how things as a peasant started off pretty bad and then got worse, and their other social classes and their rises and falls within that period, and then as well religious history within that context. So brutal disagreements between Catholics and Huguenots and the huge amounts of persecution that was faced on both sides by both groups. We also do a depth study into Richelieu, who's, when you think of the first ministers of history, Richelieu is the first, the best, the strongest of the first ministers. And we also look at the Fronde, which is a civil war that takes place during the minority of Louis XIV.
We also look at how our two kings, Louis XIII and Louis XIV, how they try to become as absolute as possible, looking at how they try to control their rebellious nobles and looking at how successful they actually are. In particular, looking at Louis XIV, the ultimate image maker. So we have a depth study that looks at Versailles and image making. I mean, he really is sort of the ultimate PR man, before we then go on to looking at foreign policy. So looking at how France manages to overcome its horrifically strong rival Spain. It's a real sort of struggle for the first half of the 17th century, before looking at how Louis XIV then goes on to make France sort of the height of the height of European sophistication. Every other country is wanting to emulate them, but he goes too far. He steals land from his enemies, he steals land from his friends, and until it gets to the point where literally the whole of the rest of Europe just wants to get rid of Louis. Now, so alongside our College 2 course, we also have Coursework. And this is totally different from anything that you've done before, because this is totally your choice. You can do pretty much whatever you like, so long as there does need to be a debate. We do need to be able to resource it, but actually the library does a fantastic job for us on that front. But you can pick pretty much whatever you like. And that ranges from, we've had people do how Alfred the Great dealt with the Vikings, did Richard III deserve his reputation? We had somebody looking at Queen Melisendre. How did she come to power? A figure I'd not actually heard of before. Absolutely fascinating queen. And we go up, people have gone right up as far as looking at how Margaret Thatcher dealt with the miners' strike, and even up as far as reasons for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And that really is your choice.
So the whole A-level comes down to 4 key examined elements. So the first is the Genghis Khan paper, which is worth 15% of the A-level, just a tiny little 1-hour paper. You'll hardly even notice it. And the Britain paper is 1.5 hours, and that's worth 25% of the A-level. The France paper, taking up the majority of the College 2 year, that is a chunky beast. So that's 40% and a 2.5-hour paper. And then your coursework is 20%. It's worth saying, though, you get a huge amount of support from both Elizabeth and I in terms of getting you exam ready. We're both experienced examiners for OCR. So you do not need to worry at all about being exam ready, because you definitely will be.
Indeed. And for the coursework, it's worth mentioning that we do an individual sort of tutorial style experience for that. So you would have your own personalised sessions that you fix inside your timetable, and just to make sure that we keep you on track. Now, outside of the examined element, we do like to look for extracurricular opportunities. So we have an hosting of an annual Historical Association lecture. I know this year we're very excited.
We're very excited to be welcoming Caroline Dodds-Pennock to Bootham, speaking to the HA. You may recognise her name because she has been on You're Dead to Me on Radio 4 with Greg Jenner. She's been on Dan Snow's History Hit, In Our Time, really famous historian, and she's talking about the role of women in Aztec sacrifice.
And alongside that, we do offer residential visits to enrich our A-level curriculum. Now, obviously, COVID at the moment, rather getting in the way of that, but as and when COVID does the honourable thing and departs, then we have residential visit, an entirely optional, that supports the French half of the course, or French section of the course, but we also encourage people to get involved with the Historical Association's Great Debate Competition. And so really the key thing for A-level history really is, if you think you'll enjoy it, come along and study it.
Ta-da.
Can you just do that last bit again, because you called your hands up and your mic stopped working?
Oh, probably just as well, because I think I sounded like a complete idiot at that bit, as opposed to the rest of it. Which bit did I stop? Which bit did I...
From where Kitty passed back over to you.
So bear in mind, yes.
After Caroline Dodds-Pennock, that
yes.
bit.
Indeed. So, alongside our Historical Association lectures, we do offer residential visits. Now, obviously, we do need to wait for COVID to depart. But as and when COVID does depart, then we'll be looking to offer an entirely optional visit that supports the French half of the course. And to go along with that, we also encourage people to get involved in the Historical Association's Great Debate competition. The key thing with A-level history really is, if you think you like the sound of it, come along and study it.